So this afternoon, Manchester United finally returned to match action as we had our first match of this summer's pre-season campaign in a fairly uninspiring 0-0 draw against Leeds. However, just because it was uninspiring, that doesn't mean there's no lessons that we can learn. And in fact, there were a few interesting points in this match that we're going to discuss today. So the first thing that I want to talk about is player positioning in terms of the roles that each player was given, because I think very often when we come into a new preseason, the start of a new campaign, we wonder if the manager might try something different. Is there a player that, for example, was used as a midfielder last year, but we've seen something different and now we're going to change their role? For example, in this match, Toby Collier started as a right 10 with Ahmad at right wing back and Bruno in midfield. But interestingly, that didn't really seem to work, so Amorim shifted it about 30 minutes into the first half. Ahmad then moved into the right 10 position, which we're expecting to see occasionally next season, and Collier then dropped into that wider position as a wing-back. And I think that points to the fact that Amorim does want versatility in his squad. I think we all already assumed that, but I think this match confirmed it. That right-hand side was interchanging, and, you know, with the idea of Ahmad and Mbumo in the future, that sort of makes sense. The other player that was really interesting, of course, is Bruno Fernandes playing in a double pivot, as we expected, but also Kobbie Mainoo in the second half, playing as one of the midfield two, rather than in the front three. I think a lot of us view Kobbie as a deeper midfielder, but last season he was used in more of an attacking role. Today, he was very much in a double pivot, and I actually think he had a pretty good performance. So the next thing that we need to do is talk about the tactics and how Manchester United look to approach this game. And for the purpose of this, we are going to use the 11 that we saw in the first half. Although, of course, at half-time, the 11 completely changed, which we often see in pre-season, which sort of kind of creates these stop-and-go football matches a little bit, where the flow is never quite there, and it felt like that in this game. In terms of the way that Manchester United were looking to approach things in the different phases, it was actually largely quite similar to last season, although there were a couple of changes. So we'll start off in the first phase on goal kicks when Leeds were looking to press high. And what we saw from Manchester United was the same thing that we saw last season, which isn't exactly my favourite approach, but that is two of the centre-backs, the wider centre-backs splitting either side of the goalkeeper, with De Ligt moving into midfield alongside Casemiro, as you can see in this shot here. You can see those four players that we are discussing. Now, I made myself and my feelings very clear last season. I'm not a big fan of this, not because the structure is bad, but because weird players end up in weird positions, right? De Ligt and Casemiro in this position here, they're not press-resistant midfielders. I think that is still a bit of a problem, but it does tell us that Amorim wants to stick with this idea. So in terms of the lesson we learn, it's that Amorim wants to continue with this, so therefore what we need to see is more movement. It can't be so fixed. There has to be a bit more fluidity with the way that people are moving, because the wing-backs were actually positioned fairly high in these situations, which is a little bit different to last year, and that does create space. I think what we need to see more as we go through pre-season is players then dropping into that space. So if this is the idea that we are going to use, we're probably not going to progress through the middle. Today we were regularly forced along, like here and here and here, where it didn't really work. So what we're going to need to see is a more fluid team that rotates a little bit more. Cunha occasionally tried to drop. We need to see more of that. I just quickly want to interrupt the video to quickly ask you guys for a favour, please. Could you possibly leave a like and also subscribe to the channel? I really want to hit 65,000 subscribers by the start of the competitive season, and around 60% of people that watch the channel aren't subscribed. So if you could please press it, it would be a massive, massive help. A little bit further up the pitch is where we started to see some more changes when Manchester United got onto the ball and were looking to progress the ball forward. We know that by default it's sort of a 3-4-3, so we've got a back three, we've then got the box in midfield, we've got the wing backs, and of course we've got the striker. But in this game, that was changing. There were a few more rotations than what we were seeing for large parts of last season. In particular with Casemiro and Bruno Fernandes, or one of them at a time, regularly dropping a little bit deeper into the back four. And I don't know if you guys saw this or not, but there were moments, brief moments, where Manchester United actually looked a little bit like a 4-3-3. I don't know if you guys saw that or not. So someone like Casemiro, or it could be Bruno, would drop into the back four with the centre-backs. So this would now become a back four. We then, of course, have the solo pivot. The two inside forwards would almost come into midfield positions, and the wing-backs would push high. So it was actually temporarily, and this was very, very brief, actually looking more like a 4-3-3 in a couple of moments. Here you can just about see it, and also in this moment here, Manchester United in more of that sort of structure, which is quite interesting. It's quite interesting. It's Manchester United trying to change shape, be a bit more flexible, potentially, trying to overload this first line. The problem was you could tell these players aren't sharp. There was a lot of rust, and the technical quality, Bruno, for example, usually one of our reliable players, a couple of passes out with play, it wasn't sharp. But I think the idea in terms of the shape was quite interesting. What we also saw was, of course, the back three sometimes as well, and the 3-1-5-1 shape that we have spoken about, where you have three centre-backs across the back line, you have a holding midfielder in front of them, and then you have one of your midfielders and your two inside forwards either side, and you end up with this sort of shape here. And there were moments where Manchester United actually tried to move the ball through the middle of the pitch, but again, you know, sorry to be a little bit negative, it felt a little bit slow. Again, Preseason, we've got to expect that. I think the start of the second half looked a little bit better when we had Yoro, we had Heaven, who are better at progressing the ball from the back. We had Kobe Mainu in midfield, who's better in tight spaces. I think that helped us in the second half. It helped improve our intensity because the touches were tighter, the control was better, the passes were weighted better, which allowed us to move the ball forward a little bit more effectively. But apart from that, I still think we were, at times, a little bit stuck in this shape. If we're looking for more of a positive, it's this man on the ball here, Matheus Cunha. In fact, I'm going to do a video on his performance tomorrow because I think to come into your first game, granted pre-season, but to come into your first game and be the best player on the pitch by a country mile, I think is a very good sign. And what Cunha had, which no one else really possessed in the first half in particular, was impetus. He wanted to pick the ball up, he wanted to be aggressive, and what I would say is that Cunha looked expressive. He looked like a player that was playing with personality. Again, we'll do more on it tomorrow and look at more of the clips. But what he did do was he provided United with the ability to change the tempo, to just up it slightly, because he takes the ball and rather than just taking a touch and playing it sideways, he was actually looking to take people on and give United that little bit of drive in midfield. And that's something that we've been so excited about. It's one of the main reasons why I wanted us to sign him, because of that ability to penetrate the opposition's block. And I think Cunha was doing that well. And there was just a couple of moments, just a couple, where United were trying to progress a little bit more centrally at times. There was this pass from Luke Shaw, which was very direct through the middle of the pitch. Last season, what we often saw was United choosing the easy option, the easy ball, which is out wide. But here, Shaw was very much firing that ball forward, and it was into Cunha, who flicked the ball around the corner for the striker. So that was good to see, and I think it's something that we need to see more of. Again, this is just a pre-season game and the very first one, so there is only so much you can learn, but it was interesting that we were occasionally looking to do that. However, largely, I think out wide was where we looked the most threatening. In particular, when we could pick the ball up one side of the pitch, we could drive with the ball and commit defenders, draw defenders towards you, and then play the ball to the far side. That felt like United's best weapon, when we could commit players to this side, switch the ball to the far side, often to Ahmad on this side of the pitch, and then look to be expressive from there. That could be underlapping runs, for example, from one of the inside forwards towards the byline, or it could be Ahmad himself being aggressive and then looking to cut the ball back. So there were moments of central progression where you start to think, yeah, okay, this looked quite good. But realistically, more of the threat still came out wide, where you've got Cunha, where you've got Ahmad. In the middle of the pitch, you've got Casemiro, you've got Collier, no disrespect to them. They're not players that are going to play sweet tiki-taka football. They're not players that are going to dribble past people. So for now, it still looked slightly dependent on the wide areas, apart from when like the Cunha and Bruno were getting on it. The final thing that I want to talk about for today's video was Manchester United's approach off the ball, because this was actually my biggest concern. I think, particularly in the first half, we didn't get to see United being expressive on the ball, and that's because we never controlled the game. And the reason why we didn't control the game was because we weren't very good defensively. We were quite easy to play against. And it came using a slightly new structure. You can see it on screen here. Defensively, going with the 3-1-5-1. So you're pressing with a solo striker, which is fine. And then we had Collier, Bruno Fernandes and Cunha, and of course in the second half, different personnel, pressing as that second line of three. And the wing-backs are then given the job where if the ball is on your side, you go. So for example, if the ball comes this way, Ahmad is responsible for stepping forward, making that 5. If the ball goes the other way, then Diego Leon would step forward and Manchester United would shift around like that. The problem I had with this shape was there's a big space in the middle and Casemiro is quite isolated. Like here, for example, there's a big space around him in the middle of the pitch. And that's okay. You can leave a big space in the middle if the opposition can't get there. You know, space on a football pitch is actually okay, even though we don't talk about it in that way. Space is okay as long as the opposition can't get into the space. The problem we had in this game was sort of teething issues, perhaps with a new system, a new pressing structure, where there were moments of confusion, particularly with Bruno and Collier, where they just didn't pick it up right and we were too easy to play through. this is where we had a problem. And the system felt like if Manchester United couldn't get that first contact on the defensive duel, then we were going to be in a little bit of trouble. So if we couldn't nick in and win the ball there, or the centre-backs couldn't get the first contact, then suddenly there were a lot of spaces, there were a lot of gaps for the opposition to go into. So that's why I think United looked quite flat in this game. On the ball, it wasn't great, but there were a few moments where we sort of sped up the tempo and it looked quite good. My bigger concern was the defensive side of the game, because I always say this, controlling a game isn't just about having possession, it's about controlling where the ball goes when you don't have it. In defensive situations, being in control, still running the game, even though you haven't actually got the football. United didn't do that. We were a bit too easy to play against. It was a bit too easy for Leeds to sort of move the ball through. Of course, there were moments where we won the ball back because we are still pressing high and Leeds were also a little bit rusty, just like us. So there were moments where we could nick the ball high. But generally speaking, due to some confusion and some big gaps and the inability to win certain battles, Leeds did play through us just a little bit too easily. And I think that's why we never really got control. So yeah, those are my thoughts on what we learned in this game. Some interesting stuff positionally in terms of where the players were starting, particularly with Kobbie, Ahmad and Toby Collier. In terms of tactically, a lot of it looked quite similar to last season with just a couple of tweaks in terms of midfielders dropping into the back four and things like that. There's obviously a lot of work to do still in pre-season. We obviously still need new signings, only 2 new players in that starting 11. So it was never going to be a completely fresh team, right? Because there was only 2 different players. But I think we certainly need work. There's a lot of work to do on the training ground, but also the players just need to get sharp. It's literally the first match of pre-season. They only played 45 minutes each. They were never going to set the world alight. I think they need to get sharper. Just losing my voice a little bit there. They need to get sharper. That's going to take a little bit of time. They need to get their fitness levels up. But I do think Amorim, tactically still, there are question marks that for me personally, he needs to answer over the next couple of weeks. So I would say keep an eye on that. And in my opinion, the best place to keep an eye on that is here on the channel because we are going to be covering the rest of pre-season. Like I said, I will be doing a Cunha video tomorrow because I think he was very impressive. And I will be covering the rest of the pre-season games as well. So make sure to subscribe if you wouldn't mind, please. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for today's video. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have, why not check out one of these 2 videos that we've done in the past few days. And yeah, I will see you in the next one.